Chapter 3 of Sanditon by Jane Austen. Excuse me. Every neighbourhood should have a great lady. The great lady of Sanditon was Lady Denham, and in her journey from Willingdon to the coast, Mr. Parker gave Charlotte a more detailed account of her than had been called for before. She had been necessarily often mentioned at Willingdon, for being his colleague in speculation. Sanditon itself could not be talked of long without the introduction of Lady Denham, and that she was a very rich old lady who had buried 2 husbands, who knew the value of money, was very much looked up to, and had a poor cousin living with her, were facts already well known. But some further particulars of her history and her character served to lighten the tediousness of a long hill or a heavy bit of road, and to give the visiting young lady a suitable knowledge of the person with whom she might now expect to be daily associating. Lady Denham had been a rich Miss Brereton, born to wealth but not to education. Her first husband had been a Mr. Hollis, a man of considerable property in the country, of which a large share of the parish of Sanditon, with manor and mansion house, made a part. He had been an elderly man when she married him, her own age about 30. Her motives for such a match could be little understood at the distance of 40 years. But she had so well nursed and pleased Mr. Hollis that at his death he left her everything, all his estates and all at her disposal. After a widowhood of some years, she had been induced to marry again. The late Sir Harry Denham of Denham Park, in the neighbourhood of Sanditon, had succeeded in removing her and her large income to his own domains. But he could not succeed in the views of permanently enriching his family, which were attributed to him. She had been too wary to put anything out of her own power. And when on Sir Harry's decease she returned again to her own house at Sanditon, she was said to have made this boast to a friend, that though she had got nothing but her title from the family, still she had given nothing for it. For the title, it was to be supposed that she had married, and Mr. Parker acknowledged there being such a degree of value for it apparent now, as to give her conduct that natural explanation. There is at times, he said, a little self-importance, but it is not offensive. There are moments, there are points when her love of money is carried greatly too far, but she is a good-natured woman, a very good-natured woman, a very obliging, a friendly neighbour, a cheerful, independent, valuable character, and her faults may be entirely imputed to her want of education. She has good natural sense, but quite uncultivated. She has a fine, active mind, as well as a fine, healthy frame for a woman of 70, and enters into the improvement of Sanditon with a spirit truly admirable, though now and then a littleness will appear. She cannot look forward quite as I would have her, and take alarm at a trifling present expense without considering what returns it will make her in a year or 2. That is, we think differently. We now and then see things differently, Miss Hayward. Those who tell their own story, must be listened to with caution. When you see us in contact, you will judge for yourself. Lady Denham was indeed a great lady beyond the common wants of society, for she had many thousands a year to bequeath, and 3 distinct sets of people to be courted by. Her own relations, who might very reasonably wish for her original £30,000 among them. The legal heirs of Mr. Hollis, who must hope to be more indebted to her sense of justice than he had allowed them to be to his. And those members of the Denham family whom her second husband had hoped to make a good bargain for. By all of these, or by branches of them, she had no doubt been long and still continued to be well attacked. And of these three divisions, Mr. Parker did not hesitate to say that Mr. Hollis's kindred were the least in favour, and Sir Harry Denham's the most. The former, he believed, had done themselves irreparable harm by expressions of very unwise and unjustifiable resentment at the time of Mr. Hollis's death. The latter, to the advantage of being the remnant of a connection which she certainly valued, joined those of having been known to her from their childhood, and of being always at hand to preserve their interest by reasonable attention. Sir Edward, the present baronet, nephew to Sir Harry, resided constantly at Denham Park, and Mr. Parker had little doubt that he and his sister Miss Denham, who lived with him, would be principally remembered in her will. He sincerely hoped it. Miss Denham had a very small provision, and her brother was a poor man for his rank in society. "He is a warm friend to Sanditon," said Mr. Parker, "and his hand would be as liberal as his heart, had he the power. He would be a noble coadjutor. As it is, he does what he can, and he is running up a tasteful little cottage or near, on a strip of waste ground Lady Denham has granted him, which I have no doubt we shall have many a candidate for before the end of this season." Till within the last 12 months, Mr. Parker had considered Sir Edward as standing without a rival, as having the fairest chance of succeeding to the greater part of all that she had to give. But there was now another person's claims to be taken into account, those of the young female relation whom Lady Denham had been induced to receive into her family. After having always protested against any such addition, and long and often enjoyed the repeated defeats she had given to every attempt of her relations to introduce this young lady or that young lady as a companion at Sanditon, she had brought back with her from London last Michaelmas a Miss Brereton, who bid fair by her merits to vie in favour with Sir Edward, and to secure for herself and her family that share of the accumulated property which they had certainly the best right to inherit. Mr. Parker spoke warmly of Clara Brereton, and the interest of his story increased very much with the introduction of such a character. Charlotte listened with more than amusement now. It was solicitude and enjoyment, as she heard her described to be lovely, amiable, gentle, and unassuming, conducting herself uniformly with great good sense, and evidently gaining by her innate worth on the affections of her patroness. Beauty, sweetness, poverty, and dependence do not want the imagination of a man to operate upon. With due exceptions, woman feels for woman very promptly and compassionately. He gave the particulars which had led to Clara's admission at Sanditon as no bad exemplification of that mixture of character, that union of littleness with kindness, with good sense, with even liberality, which he saw in Lady Denham. After having avoided London for many years, principally on account of these very cousins who were continually writing, inviting, and tormenting her, and whom she was determined to keep at a distance, she had been obliged to go there last Michaelmas with the certainty of being detained at least a fortnight. She had gone to an hotel, living by her own account as prudently as possibly, to defy the reputed expensiveness of such a home, and at the end of 3 days calling for her bill, that she might judge of her state. Its amount was such as determined her not staying an hour at the house, and she was preparing in all the anger and perturbation which a belief of very gross imposition there, and an ignorance of where to go for better usage, to leave the hotel at all hazards, when the cousins, the politic and lucky cousins, who seemed always to have a spy on her, introduced themselves at this important moment, and learning her situation, persuaded her to accept such a home for the rest of her stay at their humbler house in a very inferior part of London could offer. As their humbler house in a very inferior part of London could offer. She went, was delighted with her welcome and the hospitality and attention she received from everybody, found her good cousins, the Breretons, beyond her expectation worthy people, and finally was impelled by a personal knowledge of their narrow income and pecuniary difficulties to invite one of the girls of the family to pass the winter with her. The invitation was to one for 6 months, with the probability of another being then to take her place. But in selecting the one, Lady Denham had shown the good part of her character. For passing by the actual daughters of the house, she had chosen Clara, a niece, more helpless and more pitiable, of course, than any, a dependent poverty. An additional burthen on an encumbered circle, and one who had been so low in every worldly view as with all natural endowments and powers to have been preparing for a situation little better than a nursery maid. Clara had returned with her, and by her good sense and merit had now, in all appearance, secured a very strong hold on Lady Denham's regard. The 6 months had long been over, and not a syllable was breathed of any change or exchange. She was a general favourite. The influence of her steady conduct and mild, gentle temper was felt by everybody. The prejudices which had met her at first in some quarters were all dissipated. She was felt to be worthy of trust, to be the very companion who would guide and soften Lady Denham, who would enlarge her mind and open her hand. She was as thoroughly amiable as she was lovely, and since having had the advantage of their Sanditon breezes, that loveliness was complete. End of chapter 3.